The best performer, probably Elvis Presley. I don't think anybody could touch him. I never saw Hank Williams, who was one of my favorites. He died before I ever got to see him.
When Johnny Cash sat down for his final interviews before his death in September 2003, he refused to let history remember Elvis Presley as just another self-destructive caricature. Behind the bedazzled jumpsuits and Las Vegas excess lay a suppressed truth that Cash carried for nearly 50 years. What actually happened when these two legends crossed paths before the fame? And why did Cash's private attempt to save Elvis's life completely vanish into thin air? The archival evidence tells the real story. The day Cash met Elvis, he was shaking before anyone else saw him smile. According to the Johnny Cash biography published by JohnnyCash.com and the Country Music Hall of Fame, 22-year-old former U.S. Air Force Staff Sergeant Johnny Cash was finding his own way into music when he crossed paths with a 19-year-old Crown Electric truck driver named Elvis Presley in Memphis. On July 30, 1954, at the Overton Park Shell, an outdoor amphitheater that seated roughly 4,000 people, Elvis walked toward the stage, carrying a level of nervous energy that would soon become part of music history. Exactly how much Cash personally witnessed backstage has been recounted differently over the years, but both men were part of the same small Memphis scene before worldwide fame changed everything. Elvis had just released Sun Records' single number 209, That's All Right. According to the history published by Sun Studio, producer Sam Phillips shaped that early sound with slapback echo, which is basically a single quick repeat that makes a voice or guitar sound bigger and more alive, using an Ampex 350 tape recorder. The recording sounded confident. The young man performing it often did not. That contrast is where the story becomes far more human than the legend. Multiple accounts from people around Elvis describe an inexperienced performer wrestling with stage fright in those early appearances. One enduring story says his legs moved uncontrollably from nerves, and the crowd responded with excitement rather than concern, turning an anxious movement into an unforgettable trademark. The exact details of that moment have become part of rock and roll folklore, so they shouldn't be treated as a fully verified play-by-play. What is well supported is that Elvis was an inexperienced teenager learning in real time how to channel overwhelming nerves into performance. If the movement that helped define Elvis's image grew from genuine fear instead of careful choreography, why did so much of his public image later emphasize effortless confidence? Cash never described Elvis as someone who was fearless. He consistently remembered him as a gifted person who carried enormous pressure, even before superstardom arrived. That distinction matters because it changes the story from one about a manufactured rebel into one about a young musician discovering that vulnerability could become part of the performance instead of something to hide. The myth says Elvis walked on stage already larger than life. The evidence paints a more ordinary and in many ways more remarkable picture. While the Memphis crowd embraced that young performer, the relationship between Cash and Elvis was only beginning. The next chapter moves beyond one performance and into the long drives that followed, where conversations away from the spotlight revealed a side of Elvis that audiences never saw. When the two eventually shared time on the road through Texas, what did Johnny Cash come to understand inside that famous Cadillac after the house lights went down? Elvis's secret late-night confession. They weren't chasing women. They were chasing salvation. According to the Country Music Hall of Fame and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame profile of Johnny Cash, the autumn of 1955 found Cash and Elvis Presley packed into a 1954 yellow Cadillac Fleetwood, driving from gig to gig across the rural back roads of Texas and Arkansas. They were playing small high school gyms in places like Gladewater, Texas, for almost no money. But the real story of that tour happened at 2 a.m., when most of America was asleep. Cash later recalled that he and Elvis would sing together for 4 to 6 hours straight, trading harmonies on old songs like Peace in the Valley and Leave That Junk Alone. Their instruments of choice were acoustic Martin D28 guitars, which are basically big, resonant, flat-top boxes that produce the kind of warm, booming bass notes that make a car interior feel like a wooden church. Both men worshipped the recordings of the Statesman Quartet, a gospel group led by the legendary Hovey Lister, and they used those records as a blueprint for their late-night vocal duets. The contrast between the screaming teenagers outside and the quiet reverence inside that Cadillac was jarring. Dr. Michael Bertrand, a professor of history at Tennessee State University, has documented how young Southern musicians in the 1950s wrestled with a massive cultural guilt. The devil's music was rock and roll. Gospel was the only pure sound. Elvis confessed to Cash during those long drives that he was terrified that his new career was a sin that would eventually lead to his damnation. Cash, who had recently found a fragile peace with his own spiritual demons, would try to calm him down. Why do you think Elvis felt more at home singing 1940s gospel harmonies in a cramped car than performing his own #1 hits in front of screaming stadium crowds? That night shift in the Cadillac was the real foundation of their brotherhood. It wasn't about pills or partying. It was a shared fear of the afterlife. Cash understood, perhaps better than anyone else on the planet, that Elvis was not just a guy who liked gospel. He was a deeply anxious kid, trying to figure out if his massive new talent was a gift from God or a trap. That shared vulnerability is exactly why Cash would spend the next 50 years defending Elvis against the narrative that he was just a selfish, drugged-out showman. Those late-night gospel sessions proved Elvis was a spiritual seeker. But when both men walked into Sun Studio in Memphis on December 4, 1956, a rolling tape recorder caught Elvis doing something nobody expected, an exact imitation of Johnny Cash that contained a hidden artistic clue. What was captured on that tape? The $1 Million Quartet myth. The tape captured a remarkable afternoon, but it did not capture Elvis giving a flawless imitation of Johnny Cash. On December 4, 1956, at Sun Studio, 706 Union Avenue in Memphis, Elvis Presley, Carl Perkins, Jerry Lee Lewis, and Sam Phillips gathered around the studio piano while an Ampex 350 reel-to-reel machine recorded the music. That machine used quarter-inch magnetic tape, basically a thin strip, coated with material that stored sound as changing electrical patterns. The recordings run roughly 1 hour and 19 minutes and survive as 46 numbered tape fragments. They include loose performances of songs such as Don't Be Cruel and Brown-Eyed Handsome Man, plus gospel, country, and rock and roll standards. Graceland's account of the session and Sun Studios' history both confirm the central fact. This was not a planned supergroup recording. It was friends and former Sun artists informally playing music, while a tape machine happened to be rolling. And the real correction changes the story more than the legend does. Johnny Cash was at Sun Studio that day, but he left early to go Christmas shopping with his wife, Vivian. He was not present for most of the music preserved on the tapes, and he does not perform on the famous recordings. Colin Escott, the Grammy-winning historical researcher who wrote extensively about Sun Records and Cash, helped establish that distinction through the surviving session material and eyewitness accounts. That means there is no verified tape evidence of Elvis explaining Cash's guitar technique, nor a confirmed recording of Elvis performing I Walk the Line during the $1 Million Quartet session. The dollar bill string damping story is connected to Cash's early sound. He and guitarist Luther Perkins used practical tricks to create rhythm on recordings, and placing paper near strings can muffle their ring, producing a short, percussive snap. But attaching that specific demonstration to Elvis on December 4, 1956, goes beyond what the surviving tape proves. What the tape does prove is still incredible. Elvis was not just a singer standing in front of a microphone waiting for a hit song to land in his lap. He knew the material around him, moved easily between gospel, country, blues, and pop, and joined musicians who were all learning from one another. That is a different kind of evidence, but it is real evidence. If Elvis was listening this closely to the musicians around him in 1956, why did critics spend so long reducing him to a lucky, uneducated performer? Cash's absence from the recording also tells you something important about their relationship. These men were not inseparable partners with a secret archive documenting every private moment. They were peers from the same Sun Records world, connected by Memphis, gospel, ambition, and the strange pressure of becoming famous far too quickly. The honest version is less sensational, but it gives Elvis more credit as a working musician and removes claims the record cannot support. That 1956 tape proves a shared musical world, not a hidden confession. But by 1975, Elvis was deep inside the Las Vegas machine, exhausted, medicated, and surrounded by people who controlled access to him. Did Johnny Cash ever send the private warning letter people now claim vanished before Elvis could read it? The intervention letter Parker hid. He absolutely wrote the letter, but it never actually reached the mailbox. Back in the late autumn of 1975, sitting at his estate in Hendersonville, Tennessee, Johnny Cash put pen to paper to save his friend from the multi-million-dollar Vegas residency contracts that were slowly killing him. The intended destination for this desperate plea was the International Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada, where Elvis was trapped in a glittering cage. Cash understood exactly what was happening behind the closed doors of that suite. Having survived his own near-fatal overdose cycles in the late 1960s with the help of June Carter Cash, he recognized the physical toll of amphetamines and barbiturates. Barbiturates are basically powerful central nervous system depressants, the kind of heavy sedatives like Quaaludes and Seconal that slow your breathing and brain activity to dangerous levels. When those downers are mixed with heavy uppers, they create a chemical tug-of-war that tears the body apart. Instead of just seeing a celebrity spiraling out of control, Cash saw a mirror image of his own past destruction. Because of this deep empathy, Cash drafted an urgent personal letter offering direct help, rehab support, and a quiet retreat away from Hollywood. Unfortunately, getting a simple, handwritten piece of paper into Elvis's hands was physically impossible. According to Michael Gilmore, senior editor at Rolling Stone magazine, Cash later confirmed that Colonel Tom Parker's security apparatus intercepted the message. Parker's inner management team quickly buried the letter because they viewed any admission of vulnerability as a direct threat to the cash cow. How different might music history be today if Colonel Tom Parker hadn't blocked Johnny Cash's letter from reaching Elvis's hands in 1975? Ultimately, the tragedy wasn't just that Elvis was struggling. It was that the people paid to protect him were actively hiding his pain from the one person who actually understood it. Cash described the situation with brutal honesty, stating that Parker had created a human wall around Elvis that no real friend could penetrate. Now, does this single intercepted piece of paper definitively prove Parker was solely responsible for Elvis's demise? Not entirely. Elvis ultimately made his own daily choices and battled his own private demons. But it absolutely does prove that the environment was deliberately engineered to keep help out, turning a manageable crisis into a fatal one. The complete suppression of that letter left Elvis totally isolated until his sudden death on August 16, 1977. But 25 years later, sitting under the broadcast lights with Larry King just months before his own death, Johnny Cash decided it was finally time to expose the truth about who killed Elvis Presley. What did Cash reveal on global television? Cash exposes the Memphis Mafia. The truth Cash revealed was not a secret assassin. On November 26, 2002, Johnny Cash sat across from Larry King, the CNN anchor, and gave a more disturbing answer. Elvis Presley had been enclosed by a business system that made honesty almost impossible. In the CNN transcript of that interview, Cash called Elvis the most lonely, isolated human being I ever met, surrounded by people paid never to say no. The broadcast came just months after the 25th anniversary of Elvis's death. That statement connected directly to Cash's years on the road with Elvis. He had seen the young singer before the Las Vegas machinery, before the prescription medications, and before the circle around him became nearly impossible to penetrate. Robert Santelli, executive director of the Grammy Museum, has placed Cash among the rare first-hand witnesses who understood both Elvis's talent and the pressure surrounding it. Cash also defended Elvis against a different kind of historical attack, the claim that he simply stole black music. At the 1992 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony, Cash's remarks reflected what he had heard during their 1955 tour. Elvis repeatedly credited Arthur "Big Boy" Crudup, the black blues singer and songwriter who wrote "That's All Right," the song that helped launch Elvis's career. Cash remembered Elvis telling audiences that he was passing along music created by Southern black artists, not pretending he had invented it. The distinction matters. Elvis's version became famous through Sun Records, but fame did not erase Crudup's authorship or the black musical traditions that shaped rock and roll. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's account of Cash's career preserves that broader context, while the surviving history of "That's All Right" makes the credit issue impossible to dismiss as a minor footnote. The most revealing part of Cash's answer was the number attached to Elvis's isolation. He described roughly 15 paid handlers around the singer, a group commonly known as the Memphis Mafia. They were friends, bodyguards, employees, and companions, but their livelihoods depended on staying close to Elvis and avoiding open confrontation. When a person's entire social world is paid to agree, concern can start sounding like betrayal. When a star is surrounded by 15 paid handlers whose paychecks depend on never saying no, is true survival even possible in modern show business? Cash's account doesn't prove that one manager or one substance caused Elvis's death. It does show how corporate protection could become corporate confinement. Prescription medications were part of the danger, but the isolation made intervention harder, while the people profiting from the machine had every reason to keep it running. In plain English, the substances may have been the weapon, but the system helped create the conditions for the damage to continue. Cash challenged Elvis's public image on national television, but he saved his most personal reflection for his final conversations with biographer Robert Hilburn and Rolling Stone before he died on September 12, 2003. What final judgment did Johnny Cash pass on his lifelong friend before he drew his last breath? Johnny Cash's dying words on Elvis. He said Elvis was never the tragic joke history made him out to be. In August 2003, sitting in his wheelchair at the Cash Cabin Studio in Hendersonville, Tennessee, just 4 weeks before his death on September 12th, Johnny Cash recorded his final assessment of Elvis Presley. Working with producer Rick Rubin and senior music journalists Mikal Gilmore from Rolling Stone and Robert Hilburn, author of Johnny Cash, The Life, Cash looked back across a 50-year historical span, from 1953 to 2003, and delivered a verdict that shattered the pop culture punchline. Cash argued that despite the humiliating Las Vegas years, the tabloid headlines, and the tragedy of August 16, 1977, Elvis's spiritual purity remained untarnished at his core. The man Cash met in 1954, the terrified teenager shaking behind the Overton Park Shell stage, was still the same person inside the gilded cage. Cash emphasized that without Elvis's terrifying leap into the unknown, artists like himself, Carl Perkins and Jerry Lee Lewis, would have remained dirt-poor Southern farm boys working cotton fields. He called Elvis a tragic martyr who absorbed the initial cultural blowback so future musicians could enjoy artistic freedom. Now, does that mean Elvis was a flawless saint? Absolutely not. He made terrible choices, trusted the wrong people, and let his worst impulses win far too often. But Cash's point was more nuanced. Elvis didn't fail because he was weak. He failed because the system designed to protect him was actually designed to exploit him. That distinction changes the entire moral of the story. Now that you know Cash saw Elvis as a generous pioneer who took the ultimate artistic bullet for an entire generation, how will you listen to his Sun Records tracks differently? Cash's final recorded words on the subject were not about substances or jumpsuits. They were about gratitude. He told Hilburn and Gilmore that Elvis opened a door that nobody else could have opened. The cultural resistance was so fierce that only a figure of Elvis's magnitude could have survived the initial assault. And survive it, he did, even if the cost was his life. Cash insisted that history owes Elvis a debt of recognition, not as a punchline, but as a generous, terrified kid who gave everything he had to change music forever. With those final words recorded in August 2003, Johnny Cash officially closed the case file on Elvis Presley, leaving behind a blueprint of truth that bridges the gap between two Delta farm boys who changed the world. What will you do with that truth now? Before he died, Johnny Cash made sure the world finally knew the truth about Elvis Presley. He wasn't a talent thief or a pop punchline. He was a generous, spiritually searching genius, destroyed by corporate isolation, not arrogance. Does knowing about Cash's suppressed 1975 intervention letter change how you view Elvis's tragic downfall? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe for more deep-dive music history research. The full sources are linked below. Go read the actual transcripts for yourself.